should a church have an expense policy? And if so, what do they need to have within that expense policy?
Yeah, so I kind of break this up in my mind. There's expenses that you submit for reimbursement, and then there's expenses that, let's say you have a church credit card and staff have authority to spend a certain limit on a credit card. So when I think through a documented policy, the accounting term is reimbursable plan. That's a policy you certainly need if you're going to be reimbursing folks. Basically what that states is you can reimburse, whether it's an employee or it could be a church member or anyone, if they submit receipts and they can fully document what they are requesting, then you can reimburse them and there's no tax consequences for that. So that's like there's some red tape there because it talks through like tax deductibility. By having the accountable plan, you completely take that out of play. But then also it's good to have the accountable plan. You can build in your thresholds on who gets reimbursed, the timing of when reimbursements are submitted. So sometimes I've seen clients where, we're 6-7 months down the road and they submit an expense reimbursement for an expense that happened, at the first of the year or maybe even the prior year. That's not best for good financial reporting, right? So it's good to have like a policy to where it kind of touches on like the timing of when expense reports or expense reimbursements come in. And then the second topic would be like, okay, what happens if you have a church credit card and you have staff members that have a credit card? I would want a policy that, first of all, stipulates who qualifies to get a credit card based on their position and role. So I don't think it's a good practice just to make it by default. So just because you come on staff, you automatically get a credit card. There needs to be some kind of definition in the form of a policy on who even needs a credit card. And then of course you need to have it documented on, who's responsible for issuing that credit card to that person. So it doesn't get lost. You don't want to lose track of it. Obviously, there is a budget that should govern when people swipe their credit card. There should be a business or a church purpose behind that. They won't know that unless they have visibility to some type of budget approval. And so there really needs, within the policy, there needs to be parameters set on if somebody's issued a card, how much they can spend and for what purpose.
Yeah, that's a good delineation too of like what will we reimburse in the reimbursable policy, and then who gets card for regular expenses that they are encumbering the church with through a credit card in the church's name, credit card or debit card. That's a good breakdown of those two things to think through.
And you can incorporate that in one document, but if you're taking notes right now and this is new to you, I would say differentiate between a reimbursement and then differentiate between just a normal business expense that the church is directly paying for, whether that's credit card or could be vendor payments or anything. And so it's two separate things. And so a policy doesn't have to be fancy. You just need to think in advance what you're going to allow people to spend. And then you need to know who's authorized, right? So who comes in, what types of roles get those cards. Also, what types of roles can go in contract with a vendor, right? And obligate the church to paying for service. You need to think through that stuff in advance, and it's best to have it documented. And we'll call whatever they document, we'll call that the policy, right?
Yeah. So for church or Christian nonprofit ministry, they're not governed by the SEC like a public corporation. You're not governed by GAAP accounting standards. This policy is really underneath what the IRS guidelines would say. That's the governing body that you're wanting to keep this in line with, as well as your church bylaws and governance within if you're a denomination network or an independent church. Maybe hone in on this a second. So you're talking about reimbursable. So if it's not reimbursable, it's typically a fringe benefit. So there is guidelines on what you can actually reimburse and not reimburse. So maybe talk on that a second of what can you reimburse per the IRS, and if you can't, then what is it and what do you do with it?
Yeah. So the accountable plan with the IRS it's pretty much all about paying somebody, and should that payment be put on a 1099? Is it W-2? Oh, it's a reimbursement. Oh, okay, we'll prove it. And that's where the receipts come into play. So that's at the highest level, that's what an accountable plan is you are accounting to the organization the business expenses that you're asking, that you've incurred personally, that you want to be reimbursed from. The accountable plan makes it to where you can facilitate that reimbursement and there not be a tax reporting to the IRS.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Now your other question was about
basically fringe benefits leading
fringe
to that
benefits
versus a reimbursement.
Yeah. So that kind of gets to what's a fringe benefit. That kind of gets down to like the budget of the church and what they're willing to pay. For example, am I willing to reimburse somebody, $50 a month for a gym membership? Things like that. So those, there's a whole slew of things. Obviously you want to make sure that they're in line with your vision and mission. You'd have to look at each one individually, whether it's, a taxable fringe benefit or not, a de minimis benefit. So, again, those would be, to your point, those would be a part of an expense policy.
What I recall from the IRS guidelines around fringe benefits or versus reimbursable is one, do you have a reimbursable plan that you already touched on? And then two, is it, things necessary and ordinary for your job? Something along those lines of like, and someone happens to be hearing this and I'm using you as an example. I'm not calling you out, I'm doing you a favor, but I've seen things like dietary supplements, vitamins, dry cleaning, going to get a massage, going to chiropractor. Like you're getting it, like some of those things, like, is that necessary for my role as a pastor? Most of those probably not. Or even like mileage reimbursement. You should only be taking above your normal commute and documenting the mileage you're taking as a reimbursement. If not, that needs to be a taxable stipend. That's just if you're paying that out every month. So the general guidelines would be, is this necessary? Is this a necessary expense for my job that's in line with the exempt purpose of this organization to be a reimbursable expense?
And is it in line with our vision and mission too? Right.
Yeah.
So is it in line with what the church is authorized in the form of a budget?
Yeah.
Right. So,
Within that reimbursable plan you talked about, how should a church go about drafting that? What leeway do they have? Where can they make decisions within a reimbursable plan, and how should they document it?
So honestly, you go to ChatGPT and you say, draft up a reimbursable plan template. Nothing fancy about it. Again, the substance behind a reimbursable plan is that there are receipts that substantiate a reimbursement. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily cover the ordinary and necessary piece that you talked about. Again, I could go to my church and say, hey, I spent, $1,200 on a mountain bike. I'd like to be reimbursed. Your plan's going to, dictate whether that's something that you would reimburse or not. Again, you look at the budget. We don't have mountain bikes for Kevin approved in the budget. Like, those are things that you're going to deny. So to answer your question, you need to there has to be an approval threshold, and so those whoever the approver is making sure that they're approving according to an approved budget. Yeah.
Because you can also, churches do have leeway to within this plan. Like, they can set in accordance with their, like, the IRS isn't dictating to a church what your daily meal budget should be. The church can the church can set that. Like, if you're traveling, the church you can put in the ministry can put, you get $100 a day for meals if it's reasonable and it's fair across the board. And that's actually what a plan can help protect you from. Oh, the senior pastor doesn't get a bigger meal budget than the whoever else.
Excellent point.
So it's just fair across the board. The church can decide, do we reimburse alcohol or not? How much do we reimburse for travel? And you can set all of that and then publish it within your finance team documents.
It takes away hard conversations and gray areas if you make it black and white there in a policy. Good point.
Yeah.
I want to throw in just a question that I've heard from some of our clients related to this. Let's say you're using bill spending expense. That's something we use. And you have a card or credit card that you're using UNCAD or coding. What do you recommend documentation wise for those expenses? Like, is coding enough? Do they need a note, receipts? What would your recommendation be for a church that's trying to figure out a policy for a specific application like that?
It's like Josh Reeves, the man behind the controls, behind the camera, threw out a question. They may be able to hear it, may not. The question is, what do we recommend for documenting for receipts and for documentation on reimbursable expenses. Did I capture that right?
Specifically on like bill spending on credit cards.
On credit card or
So
purchase
it's already
cards.
spent,
Yes,
what
I got.
documentation
Okay.
needed for like a bill spending expense card or a ramp card or.
Josh referencing bill spend expense or ramp, where it's a purchasing card program or a church credit card. What do we recommend? I'll jump in and I'll just share what you think, Kevin. So you can set your reimbursement policy to whatever benefits the church in terms of, or whatever you feel like is reasonable for the church. Like you could require a receipt for everything. There's also like a de minimis, I think is the correct term for, you could say we want receipts for everything above $50, $75. If it's under that, like if you're going to a coffee shop, we won't require a receipt for $50 or $75. So if the church selected or was audited, as long as, hey, here's our policy and here's why for small meals we don't require receipts. So you can set that. I think a general best practice is you would require a documentation of every purchase and then have a threshold for receipts. So you want them to put a note what this is. So somebody's looked at it, somebody's approved it, and then above our agreed upon threshold, we would have receipts. Would you agree with that or add anything?
I'm actually a little bit of a rebel in this area. So again, for reimbursements where someone made a purchase with their personal card and they're getting reimbursed, they need a receipt. A receipt needs to be attached. I'm firm on that as part of like an accountable plan. I think it's good stewardship as well, right? Because what that receipt does is it proves that the transaction actually occurred, and that I'm not just making it up, right? So I could send an email to bill.com and say, reimburse me $1,200 for an airline ticket. And if you're not requiring receipts, you get it. Reimburse me, I get $1,200. But you know what? I just needed $1,200 to buy a mountain bike. In reality, I never took the trip, right? But you don't require a receipt, so I sent it through. If I provide that receipt, however, that American Airlines receipt, that the transaction actually occurred, all right? So for reimbursements, 100% receipt proves that the transaction happened. For a church credit card or like the Divvy card where it's a church credit card, here's my line of thinking, all right? You're not a tax-paying entity. So what I do is I completely remove the whole receipting for getting a tax deduction, right? So therefore, a receipt would only be relevant if it helps demonstrate good stewardship, proves an expense, items like that. Here's where I'm a bit controversial. A lot of people, unfortunately, they don't agree with me on this, even though if I'm running a church, this would be my policy. If you've got a corporate credit card, I am not requiring a paper receipt attached, regardless of amount. And the reason why is because I believe a receipt proves that a transaction occurred, right? Well, if it's a church credit card, I can simply look at the statement and see that transaction occurred. It was not made up. And certainly if you provide the receipt, it'll add a little bit of value, but it's just reinforcing the fact of what I see on the statement that the transaction actually occurred. Granted, you may be able to see what they bought if it's an itemized receipt. Okay, there's some value in that. However, the cost benefit trade-off of making your staff run and chase receipts, and as we all know, it's the bottleneck to financial statements. I think by having a strict receipt policy that results in delayed financials is a much bigger risk than them attaching a receipt. They have to chase paper to do that, right? It's just the administrative cost and time. I think that the benefit of not having that and what little risk goes up is worth it, as opposed to having to go and chase paper, right?
Yeah.
So if it's my policy in my church, I'm recommending do not require receipts on like Divvy credit cards. That being said, with the credit card statement, I can see the date the payment was made, I can see who the merchant was, and I can see the amount. I've covered the fact that it exists because I can see all those things, right? Now, I would like a comment. I would like a comment within my expense reporting tool that supports why you thought that it was approved in the budget, right? So That would be what I would add. In lieu of a receipt, I would say once you're setting up your, when you're in Divvy and you are coding your expense to that budget category, if it's something like an Amazon purchase or something that's kind of, could be for different things. Yeah, you do provide a budget code, and that kind of helps us understand that that was a kids ministry expense and not, an equipment purchase for worship, but it would be nice to have a comment on like maybe what was purchased. With meals, things related to that, it's good to go ahead and put what was the purpose of, why did you have to have that meal and who was it with, right? So something real quick and easy like meal to discuss missions with Jacob, would suffice. So that's my, if I'm running my church, that's my thinking and what I would advise to folks setting up an expense policy. But when I go through that, I would say most of the time it makes people nervous, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's because, in my opinion, it's the stigma. Like I have to have a receipt. But if you dig into why you think you really need the receipt and what it's proving and what it's supporting, by not having it, from my perspective, the only thing we're missing out is if in the case of an itemized receipt, maybe if it was an itemized receipt, I could see what was purchased. That's okay. That adds some value, but most of the time they're just, summarized receipts that aren't even itemized out. Ask yourself, what value are you getting from that receipt, and how much time does it take your staff every month to get receipts? Oh, I forgot, and they go and try to recreate, and how much does that delay your financials, and are you really that much better off?
Yeah, no, that's really good perspective too. I love how you broke down the why of just the cost benefit trade-off for time to get receipts. And you answer the follow-up question I was going to have about what would you want documentation in the system, which you said, yes. I think it boils down to typically the reviewer is wanting to validate the business purpose of that when they're looking at a receipt, which you would probably come back from the other side and say, like if you're the executive pastor, I'm just trusting them to spend within their budget, that everything they're spending is for a business purpose. If I go to Guitar Center and I spend my $1,000 annual budget and I don't give you a receipt, you wouldn't know if I just bought something for myself or not, or if I actually bought something for the church. But when my budget runs out, my budget runs out. Like I can't go spend more than $1,000. Like you would control it at the budget level than looking through all the receipts and trying to validate
because I think inherently there has to be some level of trust, because even with that receipt, it doesn't prove that you used it for business.
Yeah.
It just shows what you bought. It may have been a personal purchase.
Yeah.
Now to the point though, there could be more transparency. If it's an itemized, $1,000 spent on a drum set, and you see that itemized drum set, okay, Chris spent $1,000 on a drum set, and I never see a drum set.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The receipt has helped in that regard.
Yeah.
So take that. That's the thing. But I still think, go back to like earlier in the question, we talked about like the policy. That's why it's important to understand who gets a card, right? So only certain positions that you're hiring should get a card. You shouldn't just necessarily give a card to everybody.
Yeah.
So, there has to be some level of trust in just issuing a church credit card, but that's inherent, and there's nothing you can do to get around that.
Yeah. And really, more than what I'm hearing you say is more than a compliance requirement. It's really where in the system, at what level do you want the controls? You want the controls at the purchase level, or do you want the controls more at the budget level?
You just said it.
Yeah. That's
exactly right. And the more you can move it to like a budget level, the more efficient you can be, but maybe the more risk you carry, of a fraudulent charge. If you move it to the transactional level with like receipting, more administrative burden, right? But you mitigate some of that risk. So you, as the church body, you have to, or the governing body, you have to make the decision on where you put that lever. I value the efficiency, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm like, okay, I've got a policy that dictates, not just everybody gets a card. So we're controlling who gets the card. It's in positions and people that we trust, right? And I'm going to govern that by just looking at an overview of a budget, right? To spend within budget. And I'm not going to require those folks to go and chase receipts. They're going to gain more efficiency, but I'm going to get my financials quicker, because all they have to do is go and budget code as opposed to doing receipting. I'm going to like that. And I'm going to think that, okay, the risk is mitigated because I'm looking at the budget. There is a possibility that there's a purchase made that could, and it could be innocent. It could be a personal charge that they thought, it happens all the time. They swipe their card for a personal meal, right? But they grab their church credit card by mistake, having them go in and code, you're trusting that they're disclosing that is a, that was a personal purchase. Please withhold it from my paycheck. Right.
Yeah.
But I'm not so sure a receipt, if they had intentions of not reimbursing the church for that, a receipt may not, catch that too. Right. So there is an element of trust that I don't even think receipting transactions will mitigate
That's true.
against that risk.